let's just go over this. What I was working on last class was this comparison of perfect competition and monopoly. So let's just go over that so you guys can remember what's going on. Okay, so perfect competition, obviously lots and lots of producers, so lots of competition. Monopoly is the only producer, so no competition. With perfect competition, the consumers have many options because there's so many sellers all selling the same good, and the consumer will buy the good from whatever one, because to the consumer all the goods are the same. But a monopoly, to be a monopoly, you are selling something where the consumers don't have another option. If they want the good, they have to buy it from you. All right, so what that means is that we're going to draw the demand curves differently. So here the demand curve is drawn as perfectly elastic because all the sellers are selling exactly the same good. Consumers will only buy the good from you if you charge the same price as everybody else. And it doesn't matter how much you sell, you have to charge the same price. Whereas if you're a monopolist and the consumers don't have any other options, then if you raise the price, they will still buy the good, right? Here, if you tried to charge a higher price, they won't buy the good at all. If you're a monopolist selling a different good, then if you raise the price, you will still sell the good. However, the consumers would buy less. And so that negative relationship between the price and the quantity means we have to draw the demand curve as downward sloping. Okay, so here, the firm is one out of many, many firms. Here, the monopolist is the only supplier. Now, I was going to add here that in the monopoly chapter, we just draw the one graph, but if you remember for perfect competition, we were drawing two graphs. So I'll just sort of squeeze in the other one. The other one was just the market graph. And in the market graph, we showed a downward sloping demand curve and the market supply curve. And that is where the price was determined. Okay, so the market, so we had a market graph, and then this one was just for the individual firm. And so there was a difference because there's so many firms in the market. So this would be market supply, like the supply of all the suppliers. Whereas a monopolist is the market, right? There are no other firms, so the monopolist is the market. Okay, so firms are price takers in perfect competition. Monopolists are not. They get to determine what price they want to set. Profit is zero in the long run. Right? So there's an accounting profit, but the economic profit is zero in the long run. Because if there are any economic profits being earned, it will attract more firms to the market. More firms will increase supply, price will go down, profits will disappear. Whereas a monopolist is a monopolist. There is no competition. So if the price is high and there are profits being earned, there is a barrier to entry that's preventing other firms from entering the market. So the price and quantity just stay the way they are, and the profits will stay there as long as the monopolist can prevent the competition. So there's barriers to entry, whereas here there's free entry. It's very easy for other competitors to enter the market. Good. Okay. Any questions? Good. Okay. So the last thing that we were doing at the end of the last class was illustrating the quantity that would be chosen by the producers. Okay, so for perfect competition, it will be where marginal revenue or the price equals marginal cost. So let's just add a marginal cost curve here like that. And so then the firm will produce this quantity here. So what's happening is the firm is going to produce the good as long as there's a profit. So as long as what they get paid covers the cost. So, right, so the profit is here. Now the per unit profit gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and then they just break even on the last unit. So that will be the last unit that they will choose to produce. And I'll put little q there for the individual quantity. Okay, now let's also add a marginal cost curve here. So the equilibrium is the same between MR and MC. Let's see. So this is MR equals MC. Oh, sorry, that's hard to read. Let me get a different color. Let's see. Purple. So that equilibrium, MR equals MC. So that's the profit maximizing equilibrium. And then for the monopolist, MR equals MC is here. So both of them are choosing the quantity where MR equals MC. Now, for perfect competition, that is also where the price is. But for a monopolist, that's not the price. They will charge the price that the consumers are willing to pay. So going up to the demand curve here, that tells us the price consumers are willing to pay. So we called that PM, M for monopolist, and this is QM, M for monopolist. Good. All right, so we did that last class. Okay, I'll come back to that. I think we have a few more things to add to it. Anyway, so I just want to review quickly the example we did at the end of class where we were finding that exact equilibrium for the monopolist. So the monopolist has marginal revenue here, marginal cost here, equilibrium there. 3 equals 3, so that went with a quantity of 4. And then the price consumers were willing to pay was 6, and then the profit that they earned was 10. And then we illustrated that here on the two graphs. All right, so for a monopolist, they have the demand curve, the marginal revenue curve, marginal cost curve. So this is the equilibrium that we're looking for that maximizes their profit. They charge a price that consumers are willing to pay for that quantity. So you go up to the demand curve to see the demand price. And now in this graph, we also have the average total cost curve. And so therefore, we can also illustrate the profit, the difference between the price they're paid and the average total cost. Good. Okay, so we did that last class. So now we're starting on page 9, exercise 1. Okay, so remember what's different compared to perfect competition. In perfect competition, the price would just be constant, right? So all of these price numbers would have been the same because the price would be determined by the market, and then it wouldn't matter what quantity was produced, the price would be the same. But a monopolist is the market, and they can charge whatever price they want. However, at the different prices, consumers will buy different quantities. All right, so total revenue first column, so Q times P, so 0 times 16, 1 times 14, 2 times 12, and so on. And then marginal revenue, so just the change between each of the 2 points. which starts out positive. So as they lower the price, they'll sell more, and the increase in the quantity outweighs the decrease in the price, and they make more money until we get to this point, and then they start to lose money. So we know that the monopolist for sure wants to be somewhere up here, right? Somewhere in the range where you have higher prices and lower quantities, where demand is elastic. They don't want to be down here. But to know exactly at what point they'd like to be, we need the costs. Okay, so we've got total cost, and we need to calculate marginal cost. And then we need to find the equilibrium. Remember, the equilibrium that maximizes profit for any producer, actually whether they're a monopolist or perfect firm in a perfectly competitive market. This is the quantity that will maximize profit. So that's here. Okay, so marginal revenue equals marginal cost at $6. That goes with a quantity of 3. And then the price they will charge consumers is 10. Okay, so we can answer the first couple of questions here. So the quantity that they will choose, remember we call that QM for monopolist, will be 3. The price will be $10, so PM. Okay, and so now we'll calculate average total cost and profit. Okay, average total cost. Okay, so total cost divided by quantity, so don't do that one. 4 divided by 1, 8 divided by 2, 14 divided by 3. Uh, 22 divided by 4. 6.4. Okay, and then profit. Remember, for profit, there are 2 formulas. Or, so either one is fine. We'll just do TR minus TC. So 0 minus 2, 14 minus 4. All right, so $16 is the maximum profit. So how much profit would the monopolist earn? $16. All right, last 2 questions are about what would happen if it were a perfectly competitive market instead. So the difference is, in a perfectly competitive market, the price and the marginal revenue are just going to be one number, one price, and it will be constant. A monopolist has a separate price and marginal revenue, and the marginal revenue is not constant, right? And the price is not constant, right? So here we have a monopolist with a price that is not constant and a marginal revenue that's not constant. But if it's a perfectly competitive market, then it has to be that the price, what we're looking for is just this equilibrium where the price equals the marginal cost, and then we would ignore this column because we would not have a marginal revenue, or we would, but it would be the same as the price, right? So it's not this here. It would be whatever the price is, and the price would be wherever there's the equilibrium between demand and supply. So here's marginal cost, supply, demand. Where do we have an equilibrium? Right there, $8. So in a perfect competition, you just look at the demand curve and the supply curve, or the marginal cost curve. You're looking for the equilibrium. So that would be $8, and that goes with a quantity of 4. So Q star then would be 4, price star would be $8. So the marginal revenue then would also be $8. Let's put equals MR. Any questions? Excellent. All right. Let's continue then. So next page is an example using equations. Okay. Now, you are given the marginal cost curve, the demand curve, and we need to figure out the marginal revenue curve, and we have some instructions over here. But before we look at the instructions, let's just look at, say, this page 8, which we did last class. So the demand curve in this example started at $10 and went to a maximum quantity of 10. The marginal revenue curve would have starts up here as well, but it went to this here where it was 0, or crossed the 0 axis, was at 5. So the two curves are related then in that they start at the same place. They would have the same vertical intercept. But the slope of the marginal revenue curve is twice the slope of the demand curve, right? Because it crosses this, or has a Q-intercept at 5 compared to a Q-intercept of 10. So the slope here is twice the slope of the demand curve. So knowing that, then you can use the demand function to figure out the function for the marginal revenue. You use the same vertical intercept, 100, and you double the slope. So the slope here is 0.25, you double that, 0.5. Okay, so that's the instructions here, so just remember that. Okay, so then we can graph things and calculate things. Now you've got the demand curve here, and the supply curve are already drawn. Let's see, that would be 400. Marginal cost, 20. Apply. Okay, and then I'll add the marginal revenue curve. So it's twice as steep, or instead of having a Q-intercept at 400, it would be at 200. Okay, so the monopolist chooses the equilibrium between marginal cost and marginal revenue. So this quantity here is what we're looking for. We'll do that first. All right, so marginal cost equals marginal revenue, 100 minus 0.5Q. Okay, so the quantity will be 80. And then the price that consumers are willing to pay for 80 units, we use the demand function to figure out that price. So P alpha PM, so demand function, so 100 minus 0.25 times 80. So that's also $80. Yeah.
Why would there be like a double the menu slope? What's the reason behind that?
I can tell you, but you don't need to remember. Okay, I'll write it down, but you don't need to remember this. So when you have a marginal function, marginal cost, marginal benefit, marginal revenue, marginal willingness to pay, whatever it is what would be the first derivative of the total function. Like marginal cost would be the first derivative of a total cost function, etc. So marginal revenue is the first derivative of a total revenue function. And okay, so total revenue is P times Q. The price is the price consumers are willing to pay, and that is a function of Q, so that's the demand function. What's that point? Yeah, so that's the demand function. So P is the demand function, right? The price consumers are willing to pay times Q. So this is a quadratic function, so that's why I'm telling you don't need to know it, because, well, for 103 you don't need to know about quadratic functions. If you go on in economics, then you do. Anyway, so then if you take the first derivative of that, marginal revenue, that would become 100, and then 2 times 0.25 is 0.5 times Q. So you'll do stuff like that when you take probably 201. I think it's 201, the intermediate micro. Yeah. This is total revenue. Yeah.
So this is like demand function.
That's the shortcut. That's right. So it's a shortcut. The shortcut is just to remember to use the same number here and then double that number. But if you know about derivatives, then you can do it that way. All right. Okay. Now we have another example. Same thing. We've got a marginal cost function, a demand function. First, figuring out the marginal revenue function. So just using the shortcut, we use the same number for the vertical intercept, 40, and then double the slope, so 0.2Q. Okay, and then we'll graph. Okay. Now the supply curve is pretty steep compared to the demand curve, so make sure you draw it as steeper, otherwise the graph will come out kind of funny. And, okay, so now we'll do the calculation. So first thing to always calculate is this equilibrium MC equals MR. So 5 plus 0.3q equals 40 minus 0.2q. It's the MR function. Okay, so that's 70. And then the price. So the price that the consumers are willing to pay, PM, we have to use the demand function to calculate that. So 40 minus 0.1 times 70 would be 33. Good. Any questions? Good, okay. All right. So the next page is about efficiency. Now when we think about efficiency, the main measure of efficiency is total surplus. Is the situation resulting in the maximum amount of surplus for everybody, or is it not? And if it's not, that means there's deadweight loss. Now, the deadweight loss that you guys learned about before was caused by taxes, quotas, price controls, all the things that would decrease the quantity. Is a monopolist decreasing the quantity? Yeah. They're charging higher prices and selling smaller quantities. That's exactly what they're doing. So there's going to be deadweight loss. All right. Good. Okay. Now, if the market was perfectly competitive, then the equilibrium would be between the MC curve and the demand curve, and the price would be P star, quantity Q star. So then consumers would get A, B, C, producers would get D and E. So that would be the result with perfect competition. So total surplus would be all the letters, and there would be 0 deadweight loss. But with a monopolist, they choose the quantity here. Now, why do they do that? Why do they not produce at this point? There would be smaller profits at this point, right? There would be smaller profits at that point for them. And we can see that, say, with exercise 1, let's see that, yeah. So with exercise 1 on page 9, we found the equilibrium that would exist in perfect competition, where demand equals supply, quantity of 4, but the profit would only be 10. So of course the monopolist would not choose that point. They're going to choose this point where they get the maximum profit. All right, so the monopolist will not choose Q star. The monopolist will choose this equilibrium here, QM, and then charge the price PM. So that means that consumers will only get area A. So this will be the consumer surplus. And then the producer surplus for the monopolist is going to be between the price they're paid and their marginal cost. So that would be the producer surplus. Okay, so consumers get A, the monopolist gets B and D, so total A, B, D, and so therefore we have the deadweight loss, C and E.